because China in this proposal and in its propaganda, in its narrative, it doesn't distinguish between the attacked and the oppressor.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives with Neilo, a regular podcast that brings you news and views from around the world. If this is your first time checking out our podcast, you might also enjoy some of our past episodes, which you can find on our blog site at pwneilo.com or by searching for Perspectives with Neilo on your favourite podcast app. In this episode, I'm chatting with Swedish journalist and author Jojje Olsson, who lived in China for almost a decade before moving to Taiwan in 2016. We discuss Jojje's own journey and how conditions for journalists in China have changed in the past decade. But first, we examine China's ability to be an impartial and effective peace broker in the Russian-Ukraine war, China's 12-point position paper, and the controversial comments by China's ambassador to France, Lu Shaye, as well as Xi Jinping's first and only phone call with President Zelenskyy 14 months on from the start of the Russian invasion. Jojje, you're very welcome to Perspectives with Neilo. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Let me start with maybe a question on one of your recent articles. There was to give a brief background. Lu Shaye, who is China's ambassador to France, was interviewed on French television around the end of April, and he said that Crimea belongs to Russia, and then developing that reasoning to the point that former Soviet states lack legitimacy as they do not have the status of independent nations in international law. It was an extraordinary set of statements, and it caused quite a bit of upset. Can you tell us a little bit more about this whole incident?
Yeah, so Lu Shaye, the Chinese ambassador to France, was interviewed on French TV, and he is known in the past as well to have created many controversies. But this one was particularly bad for even the European Union and NATO, because when he said that the former Soviet republics doesn't have any effective status in international law, he actually also questioned the nationhood of the Baltic states, which are both European Union members and NATO members. So that's something that really raised a lot of eyebrows in Europe as well.
And given the strong reaction among all those nations in Europe, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs quickly retracted the statement. But the headline on your article says, China's statement about illegitimate Soviet states should be taken seriously. So why do you still say that then?
Yeah, there was a strong reaction indeed. You could see, for instance, like Lithuania's foreign minister said that this was a sign that you can never trust China to be some kind of peace broker when it comes to Ukraine. And I think that Lu Shaye, which is a seasoned diplomat, and he is ambassador in France, a position that has a vice minister status, he knows that when he goes on French TV, he doesn't represent himself, he represents China. And I think this point of view that the Soviet Republic doesn't have any effective status in international law, it's something that he most likely did not come up with himself. Because as a diplomat, you're supposed to obviously portray the opinions of your country. So this is something that has most likely been discussed within maybe the Communist Party's study sessions. You can believe that he is not alone in the Chinese bureaucracy of having this idea. You can see after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you can see that Vladimir Putin has all of a sudden taken a lot of interest in Taiwan and come out to support China's stance on Taiwan. And it's likely that Lu Shaye and many other hawks in the Chinese bureaucracy, they want to kind of return the favor by just repeating the Russian narrative on Ukraine and also reflect Moscow's thoughts about the status of Soviet republics. And I think this is in line with the multipolar world that China and Russia want to create, that they say that they want to create, where bigger states have some kind of a carte blanche to treat their smaller neighbors just as they please. So Lu Shaye, like high-ranking diplomats like him, saying something in an interview like this, it can not only be personal opinion that Chinese authorities try to explain this with. It also has to have some kind of background in discussions with other Chinese bureaucrats or in Chinese Communist Party study sessions.
And some other kind of facts surrounding it. I believe the Chinese embassy in France didn't apologize for his remarks either. And then you had other entities like Chinese state media kind of making excuses that he was pressured by the interviewer, and that, you know, he's allowed to have his own freedom of expression and we shouldn't attach too much to the comments. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, exactly. You can see the response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry was that China respects the independence of all nations and territorial integrity in accordance with the United Nations Charter. But it didn't say anything specifically about Crimea, and also you can see that, as you said, that some Chinese media, they try to blame the interviewer on the French TV for being too aggressive, and that this statement was taken out of context. So you can see the reaction from Chinese Foreign Ministry and also Chinese media. It was more of an excuse or an explanation, more than an apology for Lu Shaye's statements. And I think that also says something about the mindset in China about this issue, that just not to appear weak, you don't apologize for this kind of statements, but you try to explain them instead, and that further create doubts about what is really China's if not official policy, so at least what is the Chinese thought on this issue.
And Lu Shaye apparently is one of Chinese diplomats who considers himself to be able to interpret his leader's statements and his leader's positions better than other diplomats. At least this is what some commentators say. And this wouldn't be the first time, as you kind of alluded to earlier, it wasn't the first time that he's made headlines as regards statements he's made. I believe in another interview on French media, he spoke of the need to re-educate Taiwan's population after the island comes under Chinese control.
Yeah, Lu Shaye is indeed one of China's worst wolf warriors, as you called aggressive Chinese diplomats. And last summer, as you said, in an interview with French media, he also said that you need to re-educate parts of Taiwan's population after China takes control over Taiwan. And that is something horrible to say if you think about the re-education centers that you have in Xinjiang right now, where ethnic minorities are being held and brainwashed and suppressed, and also, of course, with the background of how the democracy movement in Hong Kong was treated. So he is aware of that the things he is saying is creating controversies, but still he nonetheless says this kind of controversial things time and time again, and he still stays as the ambassador in France. And when the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Chinese media react to his statements, they don't really apologize, or they don't really walk back on them. They more of kind of try to explain them. So I think that Lu Shaye, he has made a calculation that in China of today, in Xi Jinping's aggressive foreign policy that is a sign of Xi Jinping's China, those controversial statements is to his benefit as a career diplomat.
And in terms of the impact of his statements on Taiwan, is this just signaling China's intention in a little deeper way, or is there something else intended there?
I think in Xi Jinping's China today, as an official, you have everything to win to appear hawkish on Taiwan. You have very little to win to be dovish on Taiwan. I think Lu Shaye, as an ambitious diplomat, he knows if he pushes a hard line on Taiwan abroad, that is something that will have the attention of his bosses, that will keep him as a high-ranked Chinese diplomat and might even be promoted in the future. And this is kind of worrying, because it becomes a bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy, that within the Chinese bureaucracy, if you have so many diplomats making so many hawkish stands about Taiwan, it becomes a bit like a vicious circle where they try to outdo themselves about hawkish statements on Taiwan, and that creates a very toxic atmosphere in the Chinese leadership, where everyone is kind of triggering each other to be harder and harder on Taiwan, which can eventually end up in very unfortunate policy decisions.
And we've also seen then, of course, as a kind of, I don't know if it's a follow-up or not, but certainly subsequently, Xi Jinping has his first phone call with President Zelenskyy of Ukraine, 14 months after the start of the Russian invasion. There's been a lot of requests on China and Xi to help broker peace. What do you make of this surprise call from Xi?
Yeah, so just as you say, despite Xi Jinping having very close contact with Putin since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February last year, he didn't talk to Zelenskyy even on the phone until late April. And this happens the same time as China wants to portray itself as neutral in this conflict, and also want to portray itself as a potential peace broker, as a meddler in this conflict. And the longer the time goes without having a phone call with Zelenskyy, the harder it would be to kind of uphold this picture that China should be neutral in this conflict. So especially after the zero tolerance against COVID-19 was lifted, and you had more and more Western diplomats and politicians visiting Beijing and meeting with Xi Jinping and other top diplomats, the pressure has increased against Xi Jinping to actually talk with Zelenskyy. And there is also, of course, a possibility that the phone call happening now is to take focus from Lu Shaye, the Chinese ambassador in France, his reckless comments about the former Soviet republics, and instead move focus to this phone call and show, with using the phone call instead of an apology as a tool to kind of trying to convince the surrounding world that China is neutral in this conflict, and China could potentially work as a peace broker in Ukraine.
And how realistic do you think that would be of China playing a role, an actual role of brokering peace in Ukraine? As you kind of, I think you mentioned too earlier at the beginning of our chat, the Lithuanian foreign minister was quick to throw cold water on China's attempts to broker peace after the Lu Shaye comments on sovereignty.
So in late February, on the year day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, China issued this position paper with 12 points on how to create a political solution to end the fighting in Ukraine. And if you look closer at this 12-point proposal that they released, it's nothing in there that talks about Russian forces should withdraw from Ukraine's territory, or anything that criticizes Russia for its crimes in the war, its bombing of civilians and so on. But on the other hand, there is points in this proposal that talks about you should end the sanctions against Russia. So the proposal in itself was very tilted to a solution that would suit Russia. And as long as this is the situation, it would be very difficult for China because to act as a peace broker, because China in this proposal and in its propaganda, in its narrative, it doesn't distinguish between the attacked and the oppressor. It doesn't distinguish between Ukraine as being a country being attacked by Russia. It more or less gives the impression that it wants the two countries to kind of meet halfway, even though one is clearly an aggressor and the other one is a defender. And during this phone call in late April between Xi Jinping and Zelenskyy also clearly stated to Xi Jinping that Ukraine has to retrieve all the territories that was lost, including Crimea. So as long as China has a view of this conflict that is so out of touch with Ukraine's with Ukraine's view as the country that has been attacked, it would be very, very difficult to sit down and let China lead those negotiations.
Are there any other reasons you think China can't be a mediator in the Ukraine-Russia war?
China views the war in Ukraine as a part of the bigger geopolitical conflict with the US. And of course, in the Cold War, really, that we are seeing now between China and the US, US' biggest assets are the allies that the US have. US have dozens of democratic nations allied with itself within the frameworks of NATO and G7, whereas China only really have two allies that you used to talk about, and that's North Korea and Pakistan, if you talk about an alliance being kind of agreement that you are going to defend each other in the event of war. Russia is not an ally of China, but it's the most important strategic partner that China has in the geopolitical conflict with the US. That means that the worst outcome for China in this conflict would be that Russia loses, or that Putin's power in some way diminishes because of this conflict. So if Russia was to lose militarily or even lose face in Ukraine, and Putin's stance in Russia would diminish as a consequence of this, that would be very bad for China, because it could not be sure that whoever follows Putin will be as obedient or as loyal to China in this geopolitical conflict with the US. So because of that, China would never want to see Putin being weakened as a result of this conflict.
Probably to change tack just a little, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your own story. So you lived in China from 2007 to 2016, and then in 2016 you came to Taiwan. So I'm curious, why didn't you go back to China in 2016?
So what happened in the summer of 2016 was that I was denied a visa to China, where I had been living for almost a decade. I could say that I was blacklisted from China, because when I tried to get a new visa, even from Hong Kong, even a tourist visa, that was also denied without any explanation. So the reason for me never getting a new visa to China was never officially explained, but for me it's very likely that this is connected to my work that I did in China as a journalist, because in 2015 and 2016 we had two Swedish citizens that was kidnapped by Chinese police. One of them, of course, was the book publisher in Hong Kong, Gui Minhai. He is a Swedish citizen, and when something happens in a small country that becomes international news, the Chinese authorities, they will scrutinize closer who writes what and who says what about this situation. And because I was the Swedish journalist in China that wrote the most about Gui Minhai, they probably disliked my reports, and then they decided to deny me a new visa. You could see the same thing, for instance, when Lu Shaye got the Nobel Peace Prize a handful of years earlier. There was a lot of Norwegian journalists and academics who was also having problems to get the visa to China. So most likely, even though not officially explained, I am I know that I'm blacklisted, but I believe that this blacklisting is related to my work. My reports about China in general, and Gui Minhai in particular, was not liked by Chinese authorities.
A recent RSF survey ranked China as 179th in terms of global press freedom, just above North Korea. There are many cases of journalists being detained in China. Do you think it's a safe place for journalists these days?
China is not safe at all for journalists, even if you are, it doesn't matter if you are a foreign or a domestic journalist, as long as you dare to toe the party line as a domestic journalist, or if you write reports that the Chinese authorities dislike, you are in risk of everything from losing your visa to getting detained. And as a foreign journalist, you also always have to keep in mind that your sources, the people you interview, they will also be in a big problem. Having moved to China in 2007 and having studied journalism in Hong Kong between 2009 and 2010, I can really see how the conditions for journalists in China has been worsening a lot, in particular since Xi Jinping took power in 2012. When I studied in University of Hong Kong, my Master of Journalism, it was a very I had a lot of Chinese classmates, and they were very excited to go back and work as journalists in China, because they believed, and so did I at the time, that China was developing in a more liberal direction when it comes to media, civil society, academics. But as it turned out, a couple of years after Xi Jinping took power, it has instead been the opposite, that media, social media, internet, instead of becoming a tool for activists or politically interested Chinese to organize themselves or to keep the government accountable, it has instead become a tool for the government to control the popular opinion and to attack or to map or even arrest activists and citizen journalists. And one thing for foreign journalists that has become increasingly common in the past few years is that the visa is being used as journalists are almost being held hostage with the visa, that you receive warnings that if you don't report in a way that we approve of, maybe your visa will have some problems to get renewed next time, because every year you will have to renew your visa as a foreign journalist in China, and that includes often being questioned by Chinese officials and getting this kind of hints. And for foreign journalists in China, that creates a certain degree of self-censorship, which is also very worrying.
Taiwan ranks much better than China, obviously, in the RSF index. How do you find living in Taiwan as a journalist? Is it a pretty easy, open and free place to operate?
It's the exact opposite of China, and I think being a foreign journalist writing about China, reporting about China, there is not many places in the world that is better to be than Taiwan, because the community, not only of journalists but also of NGOs and academics, have really increased here in the past decade, even in the 6-7 years that I've been living here, because a lot of organizations and journalists, activists, they have to leave China, and in recent years they also have to leave Hong Kong, and many of them they end up here instead. And as you said, the Reporters Without Borders, when they opened the organization you were referring to with the Global Press Freedom Index, when they want to open their Asia office, their Asia bureau, about 5 years ago, they first planned to open this office in Hong Kong, but because of the development there, they choose Taiwan instead. The thing in Taiwan, as a journalist, the authorities are also very helpful to arrange interviews or to give you access to even ministers, but they are also at an arm's length, that they would not bother you with things that they would not really try to affect your reporting in any way, in my experience. So as a foreign journalist in Taiwan, having lived in China, it's really the opposite.
And some final thoughts from Jojje on the upcoming Taiwan presidential election.
I think it will be very exciting to watch the presidential elections coming up here in January. I think in Europe, people should pay much more attention to the Taiwanese presidential elections than is currently the situation, because the two parties that is up for the election, they have very different approaches to the relations between China and Taiwan, and that is something that is going to affect the geopolitical situation in the Taiwan Strait a lot, and this is becoming increasingly important also for Europe. So this election, I think everyone in Europe with an interest of global politics, they should really watch this election very closely, also in what ways China will try to influence the election.
My thanks to Jojje Olsson, journalist and author, for joining us on Perspectives with Neilo. You can find out more about Jojje's work on his Shinna Media website, which is Sweden's biggest news site about China. We have linked his site and some additional references for you to dive deeper on our blog site at pwneilo.com. And don't forget, you can also follow Perspectives with Neilo on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Instagram and Twitter. And we'd really appreciate a like or subscribe if you enjoy our content. Well, that's it for the moment. Until the next time, thank you for listening. From Taipei, Taiwan, 再见.